If there's one phrase that lingers in my head following the past weeks, it is words matter. From January 6th through January 20th, we heard stunningly different use of words and tone. Some were jarring, some were soothing, some were inciting, and many that we heard during the inauguration and throughout the day of the inauguration were inspirational, hopeful, and reassuring. It was as if we returned to a country we believe in despite the inherent challenges of democracy. Words carefully thought out and crafted are powerful. The Board of Trustees at Michael Servetus Unitarian Society, also fondly known as MSUS, created visionary end statements to help guide us towards our aspirations as a community of faith. We are back on track following the Christmas holidays and solstice to be taking one of our visionary statements a month and just diving a little deeper into it. 9 statements is a lot, we know, but several of the statements name things we already do or that we already are as a community, though we can always be growing in those areas. We felt that it was important to name that we are a community of all ages, that as our first 3 end statements say, ground ourselves in ritual and practice that develop lives of meaning and purpose, creates a loving community of intentional care and support for one another, and practices generosity that nourishes our spirits. The 4th statement that we articulated is that we build authentic connections across lines of difference and provide radical hospitality for all. I went back to the notes that were written after the board session when we decided on our end statements. Laura Park, who guided us through that process, wrote, "We discussed the term radical hospitality quite a bit to better understand how it would invite the congregation to meet people where they are at and affirmatively and broadly invite people to come to the table you set at the church. After this discussion, you felt it would be appropriate to use this term, even though unfamiliar, to set the vision for welcome you wish to provide." So in that end statement, radical hospitality doesn't come with an asterisk or a definition. Instead, it is up to each of us as individuals and all of us as a community to consider what that term calls us to be. A good number of us gathered in July and August for a 6-part series on transgender inclusion. We'll probably repeat that again next summer. We were all deeply impacted by what we learned. And so by the time the board gathered in August, we prioritized a few of our visionary statements, and this statement about authentic connections and radical hospitality was identified as a priority. I see concrete ways that we've been focusing on authentic connections over this most unusual year. Our storytelling evenings, our coffee houses, small groups that are meeting more frequently or are new, daily lunches are some of the current opportunities that provide avenues for authentic connections in formal and informal ways. Services led by lay leaders, including Kathy Burek, Katie and Byron Johnson, Chad Snyder, and Amy Lutke, have also shown us what grappling with important ideas and self-reflection looks like. When each of you say yes to telling a personal story, or when you share something about yourself, your theology, or your ponderings in services or in small groups, you are forging authentic connections across differences. You are modeling vulnerability and a willingness to be known in multiple ways. As a side note, if you're not attending Second Saturday Storytelling Evenings, I really encourage you to do so. And we are looking for a few storytellers for this coming February 13th, when the topic is beloved community in the broadest sense of the term. So let me know if you're interested in sharing. Where radical hospitality are words that encourage us to go beyond being polite to one another or to visitors or to strangers, there are 2 other words that move towards the opposite direction and sometimes make me cringe, and those words are social club. Yeah, it's a term that finds our way into our conversations when we lose our way in terms of purpose in this place, or when this sense of being a congregation fades from view. The description of social club emerges when we're complacent or when we're self-serving, when it's no longer a community that asks something of you or of us. I do believe feeling comfortable is important, and we all need sanctuary when times get hard. But we also need to push ourselves towards discomfort. We need to take risk, greet a stranger, ask a curious question, voice an opposing thought, or assert our theological perspective, even when it feels scary. Radical hospitality and building connections across differences results in all of us and the institution of this church being changed by all that become a part of this faith-filled endeavor. A minister from Community Unitarian Universalist congregation in New York wrote about the challenge of hospitality in their congregation. The article could have been written by any number of us in congregations. Reverend Gammon wrote, "Through the decades, I've been with many, many groups of Unitarian Universalists, including many at the church she served, in which the question was asked, what drew you to Unitarianism, Unitarian Universalism? I found that two basic answers predominate. The number one answer is some variation of at last, hallelujah, I found a place where people think like me. A number of us love this place," she said, "because we report we can be ourselves here. We can be understood by people who share our assumptions, our values, and our prejudices." The number two answer is the opposite. Variations on the theme of, I love how different people are here. I love the diversity I find and how everybody's got different ideas. It's very stimulating. She said, what's most often going on is that people that are likely to make us uncomfortable find themselves feeling uncomfortable here and they don't come. Or the people who stay will be basically like us. And then she goes on to describe this list of people who might enter the church, and she asked if congregants would welcome them. This ranges from a mom with a crying infant who breastfeeds during the service to a heterosexual couple dressed in their Sunday best with Bibles in their hands and an American flag on the gentleman's lapel, or a person whose gender can't be determined and they prefer the pronoun of they and zer. And she continues on with this range of people who may be experiencing homelessness or mental illness or a bunch of other kind of stereotypical characteristics that could potentially cause a challenge for some folks in her pews. And then come the questions. She asked, some of these may strike you as no problems. Others perhaps give you pause. Which ones? And which ones are no problem as long as there are only a few of them or irregularly attending? She continues, one or two cases like these each week, and most of us are okay. They might come a few times, but they probably won't stick around. But what if they did? What if they stayed and they weren't going anywhere? And half of the people at this church, week after week, for a couple of years, fit one or more of those descriptions. This place wouldn't be your comfortable social club of like-minded friends anymore. What then? Would you then become the one who, not comfortable, stopped coming? Or would you delight in this challenge to expand your circle of us? As Santi said, to make that table longer. I could have written these same words myself about the 4 UU congregations I've been part of. And I assume that congregants and leaders from UU churches across the country could do so as well. One part of me says, phew, we are not so different from other UU congregations. Their struggles are similar to ours. And the other part of me says, ugh, the last thing I want to do is minister to a social club. But as I watch and participate in this grand experiment of a pluralistic religious community, I have to admit I also struggle with what Reverend Garman calls out. Yes, I want the broadest diversity possible in our congregation, but sometimes I find I need to pull from resources deep within to truly find the grace needed to be in this covenantal relationship with people who have vastly different worldviews than mine and different ways of thinking. Being part of an intentional community is hard work sometimes. Although in some way we all choose this place and these people, this place and these people are forever changing. Churches tend to change at a very slow pace, which I know drives some of you nuts and probably makes some of you very comfortable. But I do believe that if the congregation is one that values and practices radical welcome, there is greater potential that we will continue to grow into the more expansive, beloved community that we strive to be. To be hospitable, one needs to be open and humble, attentive, welcoming, flexible, and willing to be changed by each encounter. Our principles speak of the inherent worth and dignity of all. Tom Owen Towle, in his book, Growing Beyond the Beloved Community, writes, "The universalist side of our tradition posits an infinite spirit that holds every creature in a loving embrace. Universalism excludes no one. Our Unitarian side has a compatible emphasis affirming the inherent worth and supreme dignity of every person, contending that even the shaggiest and the shadiest of us are redeemable. Our stubborn belief in the bedrock preciousness of individuals ought never be taken for granted. It is not shared in large portions of the world, and it is frequently threatened by bigotry and intolerance here in America." He says it remains a distinctive, critical hallmark of our way of doing church. To be hospitable, one needs to make space. In a packet on hospitality, I read, on a physical level, we understand this. When we're planning a party, we clear out the hall closet so that there will be room for guest coats. For maybe at our house, it's more like we clear the shoes away from the front door so people can kick their snowy shoes off. At church, we put out more chairs than we expect to need so that visitors will have a choice of seats and latecomers will feel welcome. We even build whole new buildings so that all who want to come can be welcomed. These are all issues of making space so we can be hospitable. The same thing is true of making psychic space. If we're consumed with our own needs, or if we're in a rush to get everything done, we won't have psychic space to share with others, to entertain new ideas, to ponder the new feelings that well up in us. James Luther Adams, a contemporary UU theologian, wrote, "Church is a place where you get to practice being human." When a church is healthy, we humans who are part of it, have an opportunity to practice love and disappointment, joy and creativity, failure, leadership, fellowship, vulnerability, silliness, grief, healing, falling, and getting back up again. Radical hospitality that welcomes difference. That's not just an invitation to join a small table or a small congregation. In an article printed by the UU World, a magazine that comes with membership when you're part of a UU congregation, titled "The Spiritual Practice of Hospitality, Welcoming People to Our Congregations Isn't a Duty. It's a Way to Encounter the Mystery and Wonder of Life." That's a big title. David Rinnick suggests 3 important things to do as a church if you are serious about becoming more welcoming to outsiders and to yourself. Some of you who attended a board forum on radical hospitality this fall may remember these. Personally, I wouldn't mind reading them regularly as a reminder. First, the spiritual practice of hospitality cannot just be another program, or it will fail. Only if you discover and articulate the relevance of this practice to your central purposes as a faith community will you be able to break out of the gravitational field of the way things have always been. Second, if you decide that this practice of hospitality is at the heart of who you are called to be, you must acknowledge the gap between the aspiration of being welcoming and the reality of your practices. They give this example of at First Unitarian Church in Worcester, Massachusetts, where you realized that our best intentions we were practicing, that we realized that despite our best intentions, we were practicing what we came to call the New England welcome. It goes like this. We sincerely welcome you into our church as long as you know how to get here and know what to do and know your way around, and we will be happy to talk to you if you initiate and promise not to bother you. And we promise not to bother you. We do a little bit of that sometimes. And finally, the third one is we must stop trying to figure out how to get other people to change and begin instead to look at our own actions. It's easy for members to believe that the church governing board or the minister or the welcome committee or someone else should be the one to change things, change how we do things, that it's not my job. But each of us needs to begin to accept responsibility for creating the kind of church we want to be a member of. In other words, hospitality and welcoming becomes a personal choice rather than an institutional issue. I do think one of the beauties of this small church, I've been mostly in larger congregations that have many layers and power and levels of authority. One of the beauties of this small church is that there are less obstacles for congregants to make things happen. I think of Janice Sankot, who decided to become a weekly greeter at the door of our building so that visitors would be welcomed. And if they showed up more than once, they would be recognized. Or Katie Johnson, who brought her connection to Hope for Youth, a drop-in center for queer youth in Anoka County, to our day of service. Crews went for 3 years in a row to help clean, move furniture, and organize their expansive donated clothing area. Or Chad and Amy, who, when I talked to them about the need to figure out a solution to our religious education program, when our director of religious education recently left, said they'd take the lead. Or Jen and Deb and Lori and Katie, who have come together as a joyful generosity team and held a holiday sale that connected so many of us with sweet goodies and flower arrangements. Or Alan Griot, who has led land and facilities in the Oakley Street Task Force. I really actually hate enumerating because giving specific examples, because there's always going to be people and actions left out. So please know that if I did not mention you, it is not because I do not see you or I do not care about your commitment to this beloved community. It has not gone unnoticed. It's just a matter of time. So is there something that is calling you to live this idea of building authentic connections across differences and practicing radical hospitality within or beyond this congregation? That's actually the question I'd like to pose. Is there something that is calling you at this time? It's kind of a monumental time in our society, in our country at this point. It's also a big point at our time in our church as we're looking at our current building and our mission and our vision. So I'm wondering, is there something that is calling you to live into this idea of building authentic connections across differences and practicing radical hospitality within or beyond this congregation? It doesn't mean you have to do it. It doesn't mean you have to have started it, but is there something calling you? Are you hearing something in your heart or in your mind that's calling you at this time? Katie will respond to you if you raise your hand or want to unmute. I know it's a big question, but I also know you all are engaged in the church and in the world at this time.
I see Jamie.
I know that I have gone from avoidance, subtle avoidance, like when I see a person who does not specifically look like they are male or female. And so I've gone from that to a sense of curiosity. And it's like, not so much about, well, what's their sex life or something like that, but who are they as a person? Maybe this is a relationship that can be nurturing for me, as well as I might be nurturing for them. And so more of a sense of curiosity and I don't know what to call it, maybe generosity.
Thank you, Jamie. And I'm assuming that's come from some of your participation here.
Absolutely.
Both our series on transgender inclusion and then the generous conversation with Kari as well, I think was
Yeah.
a real gift as well. I see Byron has his hand raised.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Um, it has occurred to me as I've mulled over this idea of the Church of the Great Big Kitchen and bringing different people of different worldviews together over food from everywhere in the world, is that it doesn't make sense for us to build a $3 million kitchen that we use occasionally. There are so many kitchens already in the world available for use. So that has shifted my dream to meeting at those kitchens to bring immigrants together with, at the farther end, white Christian nationalists, to show them that immigrants are not so terrifying and they make beautiful food, so everyone can relax a bit. I know this isn't your question, but it came to me when you were speaking earlier on. There's an entire spectrum between social club and stuffy congregation. And over the last decade, we have moved back and forth on that spectrum. And different of us are in different places, on that spectrum at different times. I certainly am. So I think the word I've converged on is village. And I think at a population somewhere less than 150 active participants, so the studies show, villages function as a unit. I like that model, and it may not be the perfect description, but it's the description that fits what I observe and what I live in this community.
Thank you, Byron. Thanks for your thoughts. I do agree there's a vast spectrum as well. Anybody else want to share? Or
People are pointing.
I know I see Bruce and Marie pointing, but I don't know what they're pointing to. We don't have the same people below you as you do.
Jen Basher.
I think
Yeah, Becca.
Becca.
Hi, Becca.
Hello. The message that I've been hearing this past week through the political news, the message of unity from both the Republican and Democrat sides, has definitely made me consider how I view, because I'm a Democrat, it's made me consider how I view the other party, the Republicans. And I think it can go both ways. It's a two-way street. But there has been a lot of fear-mongering where they're building straw houses of what the other party is. And I think no matter what your political ideology is, to truly understand how other people feel and think about either their socioeconomic ideologies or their political ideologies, it's a lot of work and it's hard to do. But this past week, I've been trying to listen more to people who have different ideologies than me. And it's difficult. It's very difficult, and trying to be open to that. But there are people in my life who I disagree with them. And in the past, I've just generally decided not to speak about politics with them or about my views on economics. Just we have different views, agree to disagree. But I don't think that that can happen anymore. I've heard this week people say that we as a nation are more divided or almost as divided as during the Civil War. And I don't think that that can continue. We have entered echo chambers, certainly, and it feels like unless we reach out to those people and say, I want to tell you about what I actually believe, and I want to first listen to what you actually believe, we aren't going to understand each other, and we're going to continue building these straw houses. Republicans are not all white nationalists, and Democrats are not all socialists. And understanding that most of the country is really somewhere near the middle.
Mhm.
we can better understand each other. And I just think that that needs to be the thing all of us as a
Mhm.
nation need to be doing. So I think that message of unity, it's a hard one, but I think there's some medicine needed for this nation's soul. And I think
Mhm.
it's gonna take years. It's not gonna take days, but I certainly hope that the people who are saying that this is their hope, unity, will really put that into their policies and will really work on it. But I can only hope, and I can only do my part and my best.
Yep. I love that line of Amanda Gorman's poem saying silence is not peace. To not consider that as, silence is actually just silence. It means we aren't in conversation. And I think just like within our congregations in a pluralistic faith community, really it's the extreme, those who are extreme, same within politics, that create a more hostile environment for us all to learn and to get to know one another and to kind of move towards that unity. So I totally agree with you. I'll always believe there's a huge middle and that we unfortunately are fed at the edges, whether it's on the liberal side or on the conservative side. So thank you, Becca. I'm going to keep us moving unless somebody has a real desire. I see people have written a couple comments to you, Becca, on the chat. Very grateful for your voice. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront. Our
Bruce,
closing, did somebody else have something they want to say? Jamie?
Bruce,
Oh, Bruce, would you like to say something before we close it out?
One thing I'd like to see us do more of on this radical hospitality, reaching outside of our church, is how can we connect with other faith centers? We were doing that at one time fairly often. I won't say real often, but often enough that it was noticeable. And how can we make those connections with other faith centers and welcome them to come to our place? What kind of exchanges can we have to make this happen? So
And then we go
really-
to theirs, that it's not just they come
Yeah.
to us.
Right.
Yeah, and I really want to encourage people. I was actually woke up thinking about this morning and realizing, really honing in on that idea that this is our church. So when we ask the question of any of us could choose to look around in our community and find potential partners or potential faith communities where we could look at creating a relationship with. So I encourage all of you to really take that question to heart, Bruce, and to see if there's a place that you might bring forth to this community, having had a conversation to see if we could forge some deeper connections. So thank you, Bruce.